Hi, everyone. This is Sebastian Traeger, Managing Director of Reliability Center, and welcome back to another episode of Reliability 4.0. As always, we're on a mission to help make the world a more reliable place. And today, I'm excited to be joined by Lee McClish of NTT Global Data Centers. Lee, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being on.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So I know, obviously, the name itself, you have global data centers, but we'd love to learn a little bit more about your company and your role in the company.
My title is the Director of Maintenance Reliability. I've been with them a little over 8 years. And it was a small company when I joined them called Raging Wire out of Sacramento. And NTT bought them. NTT is like the Japanese AT&T, if you will. They're a large company, over 100 billion, and based out of Japan, but there's a lot of different aspects to it. They do everything and anything with telecommunications. So the global data centers is just one small portion of them, and we have them around the world. There's over 155 of them. We have 21 in the United States.
Okay.
So I was
Wow.
kind of hired to develop a reliability program when I started.
And are you doing that globally or in the US or what to that?
Well, I started with just the US, and about a year and a half ago, they took a lot of us and put us in a global role. So I've been working fully and trying to extend all my reliability programs, to other regions.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we were just talking before we started. We both enjoy travel. I know you do. Have you gotten to go anywhere interesting given the reach of the company? Any place you've been that you would say, oh, this is a pretty place to go?
Well, I'll tell you where I went. I'm not sure how neat it was. Last summer, I went to Mumbai, India. They had a data center there that was pretty new. We went in July, and they had just commissioned it in April.
Okay.
And they had a lot of failures, a lot of issues. And yeah, I didn't really like the food that much. It was very interesting, just the transportation and how people drove, and
Right.
definitely a different culture, different way they do quality control, like maybe not any, from what I could tell. And last month, I got a chance to go to Tokyo,
Okay.
Japan, look at another one of our data centers, kind of with a team, kind of do an assessment of it. So those are the two global places I've been.
Great.
All of our data centers in the U.S.
That's great. Well, I've actually had a chance to go to both of those cities as well, and they are very different
Oh.
cultures. I will say, I love Mumbai. I think it's, they've got the most expensive, supposedly private home in the world, that kind of skyscraper tower. But, I've got this like really interesting picture with that house and then somebody else kind of walking by, with a cow kind of thing. It's like really such a neat contrast of the way it all kind of works together. So, and then of course, Tokyo, phenomenal city, just really, I'm always struck there when I've been to Tokyo a few times. They say that they can put like a 7-year-old on a train across the city and no risk whatsoever of any security issues. Like the whole culture kind of takes care of the kids. So two really neat cultures. Neat that you get to do that with your work. In your job, obviously, there's a lot you're doing. So you just mentioned you were kind of brought on to really think about establishing a reliability program. And you've also given a talk, and this is really what I want to drill down on culture. Can it be changed? So certainly in your role, implementing programs absolutely requires culture change. This is one of the hardest things to do in business, certainly one of the hardest things to do in reliability. We would love to hear anything you have to share about how to bring cultural change to an organization.
Yeah, when I started, as there's two different manufacturing plants where I started too. They didn't really do much reliability. Maybe had a few PM plants hanging out there, but data centers, every industry is different, right? Everybody says they're different, but the thing about data centers is they're temperature, humidity controlled. There's like no steam, very low vibration, very few rotating equipment. We have chill water pumps and cooling towers, and that's really about it in that area. So when I got there, it's like no corrective work orders. They had just started 3 months prior with a new CMMS. And it's a new one for me, so I had to learn it myself. And I'm like, well, there's like no reliability person in the company, right? So it's like whatever the IT guy got, that's what we're kind of stuck with. So that's the first place I started, was What field should we have? Really doing basically, a few months later.
Okay.
Also, just creating all the standards. Like we have a lot of like UPSs and batteries and generators, and it's like, what should the maintenance strategies be? What should all the tasks and plans be? How often? How much do we do internally? How much do we do externally? Third party vendors. So I had to create all of that. And actually, about at least in the US, 25% of our employees are all ex-military, which is
Hmm.
good. So with all the veterans, you kind of expect them to be used to like preventative maintenance, right? Because
Hmm.
that's a big thing in the military. But even now, 8 years later, I still feel like a preacher. You know,
Hmm.
like, you guys on the field, your equipment, you're doing a lot of this work, but I need feedback. It's spotty because I really value, the folks on the floor and what they're doing. So that was my initial focus for these things we call scopes of service, and then going through trying to look at reliability analysis, right? So we do like a monthly scorecard that I created. Look at overdue PMs, a lot of standard KPIs, all the things I think help drive behavior. One thing I learned a lot was, there's a couple of planning and scheduling certifications. So I tell
Hmm.
we don't really call them planners because they don't really plan much maintenance. Either it's broke, let's get it fixed, or it's a planned event. But they learn a lot from that. And the other part about data centers is there's a lot of redundancy. So we have an extra one of almost everything, and in some cases more than one. So it really breeds a little bit of complacency that, hey, if this goes down, it's not like I can't start, producing these widgets,
Okay.
like you do in manufacturing. It's just, I need to get it up. The client's still fine. I can shift all my electrical lineup around, and still maintain the service, that I'm contracted for. So that's a little different, mentality too, that I'm kind of like, it's still important. You don't want to leave this generator down for a month. I mean, let's get this thing up and running, because when the second one goes down, then people start caring. So
Right.
that's one of the things I really had to work on the culture side of it. Is this rebuilding stuff really works? It's important, and let's work towards that.
So that's helpful. I mean, even just that's in context between, yeah, a lot of the folks that we talk to are in plants where, conveyor belt stops, everything shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
You're obviously in a context where, the machines stay on, right? To your point, there's redundancy and probably triple redundancy in some cases, right? For all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. So it's like, hey, we got to fix it. So in terms of bringing cultural change, how much did you rely on, you mentioned kind of a scorecard, you the new software technology platform. What would you say are kind of the two or three levers that you found most helpful or for folks to try to change a culture from kind of that reactive to proactive, or in your case, maybe a little bit more urgency?
Yeah, I think it's another difference in data centers is there's not like a production and a maintenance department. It's
Hmm.
just one, they call it operation. So the operators and the operating, and then they do at least a lot of the PMs and maintenance. So I guess the first thing I did was I partnered up with our directors of operations. And I say, hey, we're going to develop these. I use them to help me develop, all these what we call scopes of service. And then I had them sign them, and they end up getting, promulgated down, through the so to speak. The detailed tasks, I would actually create them myself in the CMMS, so they'd be attached to a work order. But during the process, I said I did this re-implementation, so I kind of like changed all the screens, like work orders and assets and all these things. So I'm at that time we only had like 7 buildings. Now we have 21, and
Hmm.
we have 3 regions. So myself and one of the CMMS's trainers went to all 3 regions, explained all the changes that we're making, and then I had a presentation on what is reliability. Where are we going with this? What do I expect? So I think that helped a lot. You got to have that communication, and I could probably do more of it. It's just, get the travel time in, and how often do you do it? And
Yeah.
we do have a like weekly newsletter that we send out
Okay.
that kind of gives a lot of tips and things. Hey, these are some changes we made, some changes we're thinking about, stuff like that. We used to, when I got there was like no due date for PMs. I'm like, well, who doesn't have a due date for PMs?
Right.
There's just a scheduled date. Yes. Okay. Well, guess what? We have a due date. So I create a due date, change the software, and then about a year later, it's like, okay, we're still not really getting them done on time. So, we created these KPIs and this monthly, scorecard. And there's a lot of red, for the first probably 6 months. And then they finally caught on. And one of the big issues was, well, how do you determine what the due date is? Well, normally in reliability world, it's a 10% range, right? So if you have an annual, you have a 36-day window to get that done. Well, they didn't like that. I ended up talking to a VP, and eventually we made it quite a bit wider, but I went about half as wide as they all wanted, because I'm like, if I do a monthly PM, you can't have a whole month to do it like they wanted. I could do it on the 30th of the month, and I could do it on the 1st. Yeah, it's not a monthly PM anymore. You can't set up a program like that. So I would explain it to everybody, but it's one of the things that was kind of a stickler, and I really had to hold the line, for folks. But now they're almost all in the green. Everybody adjusted. So you have to kind of look at that as you develop these programs, and make sure you communicate to people the reasons why. And normally they'll accept it, or maybe begrudgingly, but they will.
It's good. That's great. Well, it sounds like just kind of continuing to work with folks, use good technology, and make sure, like good communication. Speaking of communication, so you mentioned a scorecard. I am really interested in the KPIs that you all have and how you think about running your operations. Like, how does your team get focused on those KPIs in the operations team, as you mentioned?
Yeah, we really just have 3 KPIs: overdue PMs, how many corrective work orders are created from a PM or PDM activity, and then I wanted to just track the number of emergency work orders so that it didn't get out of control. And I've been really pleasantly surprised in our company that hasn't. Where other companies I've been, they want to tag it's a safety work order, because they think it's going to bump it up, and we ours really don't do that. So those are the 3, and they align themselves with our KPIs. We only have 6 of them. You add to that, mean time between fire, MTTR, our vendor time to get spent on PMs for the most part. But I probably have 20 metrics on the scorecard, and a lot of that is just to drive behavior. So there's this tendency to cancel work orders. Well, why do you have a work order you're canceling? I mean, something is really fundamentally screwed up here. So I track those, and I added in there that if they're going to cancel one, sometimes there actually is a valid reason. The planner screwed up, and he had 2 of them going at the same time. And you got to get rid of one group of them. Or it isn't really for schedule changes, but maybe something else happened. So I made them pick a reason. And in my scorecard, I say, well, here's how many got canceled. You can see trending over the last year. Here's where they didn't pick a reason, So it's you're expected to pick a reason. So there's certain ones like that, aged work orders, they have some that are more than 6 months old. Well, we track those. We track how much labor they use for preventative, corrective ones. I don't really have a bogey for that, but at least they can see the trending and see how much other sites, similar size sites are spending, those activities. So I really use it to try to drive behavior. So we sometimes add a few, sometimes we get rid of a few. And in the past, I used one for bombs, right? We had SAP, you got to create all these bills of material. So for 2 years while we're doing that, we were tracking it, see, hopefully you saw the trend going up. Then we got to the point where we're above 95%. Okay, hopefully we'll get to 100 some point, but we don't really need to put that much emphasis on it like we did.
Okay, great. Well, it's I think it seems really effective to just have 3 KPIs, because I do think a lot of organizations kind of overthink that. And, if you've got too many, it just feels like noise. But to say, hey, here's three we're solving for, and you can understand how your activity is going to move the needle on those, sounds like a way to do that. One of the things I'm interested in for you all, especially given the, just the relative, sounds like yeah, just the operation you all have is how you handle RCAs. Our company does a lot in the RCA world, so we always like to ask people about this question. How does that work in the data center world?
Well, yeah, when I first joined the company, I was asked to create a program. And so I did. I had training. I brought in, the company that we use in their software, it's cause and effect software. And the premise was our operations would say, yep, okay, we need a trigger. Let's go ahead and create one. Well, a year goes by and nobody ever said, hey, let's go do an RCA. Following like our VP of Ops says, hey, Lee, we had this event, we need one. So I did it, and it still never really seemed to stick for whatever reason. So to be honest with you, if the customer requires it, then we do them. They've been actually put off in a different department,
Okay.
not my department. It's just a decision that was made. The one thing that we do a lot in this industry, or at least my company, the incidents. So if they have a bridge call because we lost a UPS or we lost something, then there's a ticketing system, which I think is kind of IT, specific related. So it gets a ticket number and gets flagged as something, but there's not a connection to like the CMMS, or there's not like a box that says RCA required. So we're working towards that. I think we're going to get there pretty soon, within the next year. And we just a couple of weeks ago had a global guy designated as the RCA guy.
Okay.
So the majority of them that I've seen seem to be either vendor related or kind of a high level overview, not a lot of good deep dives, like I want to see and I want to push for.
And is that because, sometimes it's because it's just not a super complicated operation. We don't need to do deep dives, or is it just, yeah, that's just an area where the culture change maybe hasn't come yet?
I think it's both, because a lot of them are very simple, like, yep, hey, the bearing broke. But you know what? You send a bearing out. Well, what did the vendor tell you? Was it something from ESD, from a VFD? Is there spalling? What was the failure mode of that? And maybe you have a problem with alignment or speed or lubrication and whatnot. Those are kind of simple, but I would still submit, and that's what I've told our management, like as a company, I think there's enough events that there ought to be at least a dozen that should be a deep dive, because when you look at training and procedures and all that, not just a failure analysis, but what is the root cause and how do we really handle the prevention end of it?
It's good. It's good. Well, it'd be good to learn more about that. I do want to move on to one other topic is innovation. So obviously, data centers are a huge area of attention right now, right? Data centers are growing
Yeah.
quite significantly with AI and all the power they use and the equipment. What types of innovations are you seeing in kind of the data center environment that and even in the way they're for reliability?
Yeah, one of the areas I think that really needs to get pursued more is predictive analytics. I can't really justify a lot of expense on downtime like you can in manufacturing. So if I look at the cost of doing like these annual vendor third-party PMs, can I get by doing it every other year, maybe every third year? If I can continuously monitor these, like, there's some companies out there like Snyder and Vertiv and Eaton who say there's like 200 attributes of that UPS, which includes the batteries. And if I'm monitoring that, I'm looking at the trends. Do I really need to do all those, inspections? I think you still need to have a visual eyes on it at times, at some certain interval. But if I can reduce cost by that, I think that's the way to go. More condition-based maintenance. So that's a big area I see. AI, a lot of it is in troubleshooting, to help out, as we get a lot of people, retiring and a newer generation coming up, the YouTube generation, they like to look at those and not have to dig into the manuals, use AI, which is out there to help them, banner back and forth. The troubleshoot stuff is great. Using it for, failure analysis, going through your work order descriptions and finding common, keywords and things like that and help develop, programs and run FMEAs. And I've been using it even just to look at globally, like what statutory requirements are like in Germany, for a chiller and stuff like that, so we can make sure that we're covered. So there's a lot of application for it. And that is the reason global data centers are just expanding. You just
Yeah.
can't build them fast enough.
It's well, on that topic, I am curious, are they getting bigger or smaller when you're building data centers? Or are they all kind of, is there like a best practice size at this point to build a data center?
Yeah, they're definitely getting bigger. When I joined the company, they were like 12, 16 megawatts. About 6 years ago, our design was 36 megawatts. And then we got one that we just built last year for 84. We got one we're going to commission this year, it's 96. And they're talking about campuses having as much as 1 giga, maybe 6, 7 buildings or maybe more. It's getting bigger. And
So for my benefit, because I'm not, so you're defining size by gigawatt. That's how much
yeah,
power is going in.
right.
And when you talk about, I think you said 94, 96 or something megawatts. What, just again, I probably should know this, but explain that to me, like how many homes can that power?
Yeah, I had that at the tip of my tongue before. I'm thinking they say like 1,000 homes or something for a megawatt. I'll give you another perspective. I was in the Navy on submarines, and my Sturgeon class submarine reactor is rated for like 26 or 27 megawatts.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's like 4 nuclear subs.
Yeah, for the smaller ones.
And so then how much like space is that? Is that, I don't know, an acre, 10 acres?
Yeah, it's probably a good acre. I bet the ones, getting closer to 100 megawatts, those are probably at least 3 acres. I'll bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then like how many computers would be inside something like that?
Oh yeah, I really couldn't tell you. There's rows and rows of these servers. I tell you how many are in a building. I just kind of focus on the equipment.
Right, right. Yeah.
I wish I could tell you.
No, it's fascinating. It's just unbelievable to think about scale, right? When you're,
Oh yeah.
I've been in a couple data centers before, but that was way back in the day when, you could sort of go and put your own equipment in a data center, when they used to like co-locate, which I don't even think that's a thing anymore. Now I think it's just everyone outsources their racks and, they don't even have racks anymore. So yeah, it's fascinating to think about. Well, let's one last final word. I always like to ask folks, just kind of looking back at your career, if you were to be talking to a new reliability engineer, somebody in maintenance, what do you think with your expertise, your experience, what might you say to somebody just starting out, maybe saying to yourself, hey, here's something I really think you need to focus on if you're going to excel in this field?
Yeah, I think you just need to have you have a lot of it. Guys go through engineering school, some of them co-ops, maybe some of them not. You learn all the theory, but when you get out there and become like, say, an engineer or maintenance engineer and work with the people that have to deal with the stuff, you're like, well, why did that guy really design it that way? Because, I take all this stuff apart to even get to, that bearing or gear or what have you. And just be able to ask a lot of questions for understanding, but to get other people to be thinking about too, like, oh, what could we do? Or how could it be better? What is a continuous improvement way to fix this from not failing again? And in maintenance reliability, it covers so many different things. Every day you go in, it's something different. And there's always room for improvement and whatnot. And that's what I enjoy about going to work, just learning something new all the time and always making it better than I received it.
That's great. Well, that is a great thing to end on. I love this, the curiosity that you still have, the desire to continue to learn more and grow. And I'm sure that is a big part of what has made you just be a huge asset to organizations. Well, thank you, Lee, for your time, and really appreciate the insightful conversation. And again, today we've had Lee McClish with NTT Global Data Centers on. And to all you listening, we are here to help engineers, but really anyone who wants to learn and to take steps. We like to think about using technology to solve problems. And so anyone looking to do that, we'd love to, hope join us. And of course, our company, if you're looking for anything related to root cause analysis, whether training or resources, materials, check out reliability.com. If you're looking to dig deeper into RCA specifically, then let our in-house software, Easy RCA, help you out with that. Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. We will see you on the next episode as together we work to make the world a more reliable place. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.